Welcome to the fourth episode of the Planting Change podcast, recording at Las Bandurrias Food Forest and Homestead in the beautiful hills of Minas, Uruguay.
I'm Lorena.
And I'm Randy. Since 2021, we've planted thousands of trees to create our syntropic food forest, bridging ancient wisdom and modern science to rebuild ecosystems and communities. Regenerative agriculture isn't just for farms, it's for backyard gardens, public spaces, and even balconies. Want to be part of the new agricultural revolution? Let's dig in. All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about bioconstruction, getting our hands dirty in a different way, working with mud and earth to make buildings. We've got several structures here at Las Bandurrias that we've made with different methods of bioconstruction, and it's been a really fascinating process. Real quickly, I think we should revisit a couple things from the last episode because we said we would get back to a few things, and there's a couple things that we should mention anyway. There was a bit of background noise, I apologize. It was windy that day, and out here in the middle of the countryside, it's a bit rustic, and anyway, I edited out most of it, but apologies if it was a little noisy in the background. A couple notes about some mistaken species here. There's a tree called anacahuita that I said was called a she oak. I was mistaken. She oak is a casuarina, which is another tree we have planted here that's more like a pine tree. The anacahuita is a California pepper tree or a Peruvian pepper. Skynus molsche is the scientific name. And in looking at this on Wikipedia, it made me laugh because the name California pepper tree, it's not native there. I'm native from California, but they ended up planting a whole bunch of it in California in the late 1800s. And there was an LA Times clip raving about it. And I don't know why. It just made me laugh thinking about it in that old style marketing voice. One of the first features to grip the Eastern tourist when visiting this favored winter resort is the wonderful feathery foliage and the gorgeous scarlet berries of this matchless shade tree, giving, as it does, a pleasant air of holiday making and a wealth of tropical color to the Californian landscape, why the pepper tree has become an integral part of life in the sunny Southland. Well, anyway, a few years later, they ended up not liking it so much because it has really strong roots, one of the reasons why we do like it, but it was breaking up sidewalks and messing up buried telephone wires and sewer pipes, and so they took a bunch of them out. And it also can harbor black scale, which is an insect that's not great with citrus groves. So anyway, they stopped planting it in like the 1930s, but it still is in many areas called California pepper tree, even though it's not from there.
We'll rename it Uruguayan pepper tree now.
There you go. We were wondering where lettuce is native to. It's from the Middle East or Western Asia. We talked a little bit about consuelda, comfrey. It's actually native to Europe. There's another plant here called Suelda consuelda, which is a type of vine fern or a snake fern that is native here. 2 more points. There was a tree called transparente that we were not sure how it's called in English. It is called nayo or mousehole tree. It's native to New Zealand. And last but not least, there's a bug that bothers my nightshade plants, my tomatoes, my potatoes, bell peppers. Not every year, not all the time. This year it's been pretty much under control, but I've had a few infestations. Bicho morro, or vaquisha here. In English, it's a blister beetle. Totally manageable with potassium soap. So, with that out of the way, let's start talking a little bit about bioconstruction, working with natural building materials to construct a home, or as we're doing, we're building a community center now using mud that we're digging right out from our pond, which right now isn't much of a pond. We're in summer and it's very hot and it's dry. The pond is dry. But we take advantage of that fact and take out some of the clay-rich soil from underneath, mix it up with water, straw, sometimes sand for plasters, sometimes lime for plaster.
Cow poop.
We use cow poop. We're going to be talking about poop. Don't you worry. Stay tuned. We're going to be talking about poop today. So that's what's been going on with our community center. We're going to talk a little bit about construction history a little bit, but mainly talk about what we've been doing here and how it applies here. And I think it very much applies to part of our story here, part of what we're doing, and part of what we're doing with the community. We make these community volunteer days roughly once a month. We've taken the last few months off for various reasons, and we're getting ready to get started back up again in February. So excited about that. It's a labor-intensive process. I don't want to talk on too long without letting Lorena do some talking, but I came here, as we discussed in episode 2, I came here in 2017 for a project, like as a volunteer, to learn how to make these superadobe dome homes. It's a really, really cool process we'll talk a little bit more about in depth in a bit. But essentially, I never had any experience whatsoever with construction, and this was something I felt was very much within my reach once I had tried it out as a volunteer. It's got just, there's a lot less mystery to it, and it's a lot more intuitive than traditional architecture. It just, this was a lot more manageable, I would say, and a lot more forgiving. That's a great word for it, if I may say so myself. It is. It's a lot more forgiving. It's a super cool process. Like I said, we'll talk about it in a bit. But in the process of making these other domes, I found this property here and decided to make a dome house for myself. And again, we'll get back into that. But then Lorena and Renata came here in 2019 and then returned in 2021 and started working on their house. That's what I would call more traditional bioconstruction. Superadobe is sort of a more modern introduction. I think in the 1980s or 1990s it was developed. Working with mud and straw and animal dung has been done for thousands and thousands of years, and it's not something that I'd ever participated in. And so it was really cool to get to be a small part of the construction. I mean, I helped out on a couple of the volunteer days, but the two of them were out there all the time. It's labor intensive, especially for two people. For one or two people, it's a lot of work. It takes patience.
Not to mention living inside the construction build, waking up and looking at all the things you got to do. That was the hardest part for me.
Well, did you guys have experience with this kind of construction before, like seeing it or doing it or anything like that?
Yeah, about 10 years ago, when we first started dating and we started going to this community of indigenous cultures in Brazil, where in Minas Gerais, where we're from, that's where we first started with bioconstruction. There, they were building with hyperadobe, which is like those long worm-like bags that you keep filling and pressing it down.
It's an even newer edition of superadobe. So superadobe came out actually from an Iranian architect who was based out of Los Angeles, near Los Angeles, in Hesperia, California, a place called Cal Earth. And then hyperadobe came out from Brazil. Actually, it's a Brazilian advancement on the idea of superadobe.
For us, it was beautiful because it's definitely not a job, like Randy said, that it's very difficult to do it by yourself or with two people. So when we got to that community, we started going every month and then every week, and then eventually we went to live there. There was a whole villa made of hyperadobe, and every month, every couple of weeks, there was a communal work event where people get together and work on the bioconstruction. And then we saw that it's definitely a type of work that works better in community. There's so many parts to it, from preparing the mud and the material, putting it inside those bags, pressing it down. There's so many parts to it. So it's definitely a group event. But there we fell in love. We were like, wow, we can build with dirt. We can definitely literally dig a hole and build a house with it. And when we eventually went to live there, we decided to experiment ourselves. We were living in a tent in the forest, and we decided to make ourselves a little protection. So we made a 3 by 3 meter square little house, which we used then the cob method, which is just literally putting mud on top of mud until you get to the top, to the roof. And that was the first time we did it by ourselves, literally going into the forest, looking for the wood, cutting it down, making the holes, the whole thing, trying to make it straight. It's a whole process. But ultimately, I think what I loved about it is the freedom, because when you say that I built my own house, it feels like you need some kind of proper training. You have to be an architect or something like that. And with bioconstruction, you have the ability to, by your experience, you can learn to build a house. You don't necessarily have to be a professional about it. Of course, professionals do help, and it's nice to have friends that can actually put the things straight, not crooked or leaning towards one way or another. But it's definitely a freedom that everybody can join, kids, adults. There's space and there's work for all types of levels. So that's what I really loved about bioconstruction when I first got into it. But it all depends where you are. In Brazil, in Minas Gerais, the soil there is much different than here. Here we're lucky to have a very clay-rich soil, so we don't necessarily have to go and buy clay, where some people do have to go and buy a truck full of clay. So it depends if you have a sandy kind of soil or a clay-rich soil. It all depends on where you are and what kind of soil you have. But when we got here, it's just learning about the materials we have around. And then we saw the other methods, right? Because if you're working by yourself, in our case, it was just me and Renata, we wanted to make the work lighter And back in the community, we saw that it's heavy to lift the mud and do it all by yourself. As the wall gets higher, you need to lift higher. And here we started working more with straw mixes that have more straw than mud, which made the job much lighter. So there are techniques for all kinds of levels, not only just straw and clay mix, but also just straw, the straw bales. There's so many kinds of techniques to build your house from all kinds of materials.
Yeah, straw houses and straw buildings are very interesting. They're very thermically well designed, so in the winter they can stay warm longer, and in the summer they can stay cool longer during the days. They essentially act as like a thermal bank, which is the same with these mud walls. You're creating a sort of monolithic structure in some ways that's going to be like a rock, taking in all that heat during the day. But depending on what building material you're using and how thick the walls are, it's going to take a lot of time to pass through onto the inside. So the walls of the superadobe dome, it's about 40 centimeters. So it takes about 12 hours for the heat of the middle of the day to come through. So at about midnight, you can start feeling a little bit of warmth from the middle of the day, which is great. It sort of defers the heat from summer in the middle of the day, but it also helps keep you warm in the winter. And also, if you've got the stove going in the winter, those thick walls will help you keep a lot more of that heat inside. It can take a bit longer to actually heat the house once you're getting started, but all things to consider if you're thinking about building your own space. These kinds of construction, be it cob or wattle and daub or adobe bricks, there's all sorts of different materials, different methods for making houses out of natural materials that have been in use for thousands of years. My first experience was in Los Angeles. I went to Olvera Street, and there's like an old adobe house there. That's, I think, the oldest standing building in Los Angeles, and I think it was built in like 1818. But it's a mud ranchito made with adobe bricks, and it's still there, still standing. Obviously, it's had some sort of conservation work done on it. It's sort of like a museum space now, but it's fascinating to see it there in the middle of all these skyscrapers and just the madness of central Los Angeles, to think of what it was just 200 years ago. But the building's still standing. And just this last year, there were some big wildfires, as there often are in Los Angeles. And I remember seeing a picture of a mountainside pretty much all burned out, except for a cob outhouse that someone had built on their property. It was still intact and still standing tall, but everything else around it was totally charred. So there are some definite benefits besides just economic benefits to working with mud and earth and natural materials. Historically, after we started as a species building with whatever things we had around us, be it straw or bamboo or rocks, adobe bricks were one of the sort of first constructed materials for construction, which is basically a mix of mud with some kind of fibers, sometimes a little bit of sand, but they're left in the shade to dry so that they dry evenly. They've got to be flipped every day or so, but you can make a mold, and I don't know if they have to be flipped every day, but it's good. You want to have it circulating on them to dry evenly, but it's got to be in the shade. And these adobe bricks were used for hundreds, if not thousands of years before the market for fired bricks. So using a clay soil, but then actually cooking the bricks in a very hot oven, that started to become fancy and trendy, and it became a larger industry. It was able to scale. I mean, bricks are still bioconstruction. You're still working with something natural, but it does have quite a bit more embodied energy in its production because we're using lots of wood to make a big hot fire to cook these bricks, but it ends up being a very, very strong, very resistant building material. But also, alongside bricks, you oftentimes will want to have some sort of plaster, sometimes called a render, on the outside of the house. What's commonly been used for, again, thousands of years is lime from limestone, or sometimes from fired seashells. Things that are rich in calcium, limestone, seashells, things like that can be turned into hydrated lime, quicklime, slaked lime. There's different methods of using lime, but it's one of the principal binders that we would use to hold together sand to be a plaster. And your plaster is basically protecting the structure underneath your walls that you've built. So the plaster adds quite a bit of lifespan to your walls. And on the outside, if you wanted to paint something to protect the plaster, you can do that too. All of these things can definitely add to the longevity of your house or your project. Lime can be produced with biomass, with a fire made by biomass. So using wood, a person can make this fire. It doesn't require some sort of liquid, gas, or other kind of fuel. Like, this can just be made with wood. And in its curing process, it actually reabsorbs a lot of the carbon dioxide that was used or generated in its production. So it's a much more earth-friendly alternative than Portland cement, which is sort of the de facto construction material of today. And it has its reasons. It's a lot easier to use as far as it's very standardized, it's very consistent globally, and it doesn't require as much know-how as you might need with lime. Lime is a little bit more delicate, I don't know, a little more picky. It's more sensitive to temperatures, to water. Lime is tricky. During the curing process, you've got to have it a little bit more controlled than you would with cement and with Portland cement specifically, and it takes a bit longer to fully cure, to reach its full hardness. So it's a different curing process than cement. I don't want to get into like chemical bonds and stuff, but essentially the lime is reacting with the air slowly, being exposed to oxygen and carbon dioxide, and it goes through a process called carbonation where it reabsorbs the CO2 and continues to do so. And it's got some really interesting properties like self-healing, small cracks, like as it continues to cure and things like that. It's really, really interesting that you can come back in and cure some of these cracks. Some of them cure themselves just after a rain or something like that. If there's a little bit of lime that hasn't been fully cured, just with a little touch of rain, it'll harden up and fill in that crack. So they are doing some experiments now with different kinds of cements that can be self-healing too with microorganisms. We're going to talk about those towards the end of the show a little bit because it's still very much understudy, but it's some interesting stuff. So Portland cement came around, I think, in like the 1820s or something like that. It sets relatively quickly. Like within a day, you can start building on top of it again. Like it's really pretty firm. It's not fully cured until after a week or something like that, but it sets up much more quickly. It doesn't require quite as much skilled labor as you might need to know how to use lime. So it, like I said, the lime's just a little bit more delicate, a little more tricky, but it's largely been supplanted by Portland cement. It's the number 2 most used item in the world after water.
Wow.
Portland cement.
Why is it called Portland cement?
The guy who invented it, whose name I don't remember, it reminded him of a kind of stone called a Portland stone because of its gray color that comes out. But essentially, it varies from lime in that it's still a calcium-based rock, but it's heated to much higher temperatures. So lime, I think, has to be heated up to like 900 Celsius, 1600 something degrees Fahrenheit, whereas Portland cement, I think, has to be heated up to 1450 Celsius or 2600 Fahrenheit. It takes a lot more energy to create cement than it would to create lime. And it ends up being quite strong, but you oftentimes need to put a whole bunch of metal rebar inside of it to reinforce the concrete because it's got certain strengths, but other strengths it doesn't have. I forget. It got like good tensile strength, but not good, I forget what. But it needs to have some sort of metal rebar in there. It's not compatible with lime. The lime just eats it right away. The rebar can survive inside of a cementitious substrate, but not inside of lime. And the kiln temperatures of cement are 1450 Celsius or 2600 Fahrenheit. Whereas lime, again, is 900 Celsius, 1600 something Fahrenheit. The cement industry is responsible for approximately 7% of the global CO2 emissions. With those pollutants, there's other particulate matter, mercury, acid gases, all sorts of fun things. There's actually a big giant mine not too far from here outside of Minas. Minas is a Spanish word for mine, and there's a large cement mine not far from here. We're far enough away from it not to hear the dynamite blasts or whatever they're using, but it's a big giant hole. It's strange to me to see people like stop and take selfies in front of it sometimes, but that is the industry.
It's a tourist destination in Minas.
Yeah. I think they have to pump water out from there continuously too. They've dug down so deep. I don't know. I would imagine they just have to have pumps running all the time to keep it from flooding back in, but I have no idea.
I'm guessing it gets to a point where they can't take it anymore, right? Just never ending.
I've heard different things that there's X number of years left that they'll be able to extract from there, and then they're going to have to move on. And I don't know. There's a whole lot of infrastructure there that I suppose is take apartable and movable, but I'm guessing they would probably take advantage and also like update certain things.
If cement is a finite resource, it ends eventually. And then what? How are you going to build your buildings?
It's not a renewable resource, and it's definitely, like many things, becoming more dispersed. So taking more energy, machines that can dig deeper or break up bigger pieces of rock to get less of the actual product. They're not finding such high concentrations as they once were. This, like for steel, the metals that you use to make steel, they're just not finding the same quality in the same amount either. And it's just not the same as finding a lot in the same area and using less machinery to be able to get to it. So that's happening with a lot of natural resources. So basically, the cement is a mix of calcareous rock, I think is the word I want, but something high in calcium, like you would have for the limestone. They're usually getting it out of the same quarries that they're getting limestone or lime out of, but it's a different process. It's a different cooking process. They add in some different clays, some different things that contain aluminum and silicates, and cook it to a much higher temperature. And that's what makes the gray Portland cement powder. It's pretty easy to use. You mix it with sand and water, and it sets up pretty quick. We've used it sparingly here. It's not my favorite thing at all, but it has its place in some parts. I mean, even the community center, we do have a foundation underneath with some of the cement blocks and some of this rebar and stuff like that. Just it's a big structure, and we want to make sure we've got a strong foundation. There are definitely other alternatives that can be investigated and things like that, but one of the things, I don't want to speak for everyone, but one of the things I have found is you got to pick your battles. I would love to be able to do everything 100% super ethical and green, and we do what we can. Oftentimes, things that appear green aren't. They're coming from the other side of the world and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, but it's organic, but okay, but how much gas was used to get it to my doorstep? Because oftentimes it's that too. It's that delivery, the big giant box with all the plastic bubbles with the one thing in it that came next day, express air.
Yeah, but
Like,
then if you do that too, you're stuck. You won't do anything because if you want to be 100% anything, you're always going to be stuck because it's in the world today kind of hard being 100% organic or sustainable. You know, like you said, even for the natural things to get here, we need gas, we need
yeah.
all those other things.
Yeah, so I mean, we have some cement blocks underneath the community center that we're building here, but up above that, it's been using these mixes of mud and straw, sometimes animal dung, and sometimes sand. But we started this community center in October, yeah, like October 2024. We started kind of just doing the foundation stuff. It's an 8 by 8 meter space. It's going to have a loft space as well. It's a relatively tall building, so I don't know how many meters tall it is, but it's at least 5 meters because I
It's
had to climb
six.
up the
Yeah,
ladder.
the highest point is 6 meters.
I climbed up the ladder the other day when we were working in there and cutting some of the posts that are sticking out past the roof. And yeah, it's a tall building for sure, but it's been coming along thanks to help from people who we invite out once a month. We've got a WhatsApp group, but also on our Facebook and social media stuff, we pick a date. I mean, we're almost always here doing things, learning ourselves, and we can always use a hand pretty much. So
And that's the thing with the bioconstruction too is it's a tool. It's a community building tool as well. Like I said, in group it works so much better. It turns out to be a fun event, even for for people who are not there every day building. Come in one day in a month and play with mud and step on the mud and get dirty. That's something that we are always told not to do. Don't step on the mud. Don't get your clothes dirty. And then people come. It can be so many things. It could be therapeutic. It could be a great tool to strengthen relationships with your community and your friends. It's definitely an awesome thing to try out, even from a small thing, from making a bench to a whole house. We keep saying it's really difficult and it's really heavy, but there's so many different projects you can make with bioconstruction. Not necessarily just big structures. When you look at the salon, the community center we're making, you think, oh my God, it's so much work. But there's so many hands that were involved in so many events, and it ends up being fun, thinking about all the times that we were working. It's always been a kind of a group thing. But the temperature, the climate around, working outside is always, depending on nature's cycles. And so the winter can be a bit hard and wet. Bioconstruction and water, rain is definitely something that you have to prepare yourself for. Depending on what moment you are on the build, you can't really get certain things wet. And so there are so many things involved, to think about. But when you have a group that you can do that with, it really makes it much easier.
yeah, you can have a mud wall that can, if it rains really heavy on that mud wall right after you make it, it's going to wash away quite a bit of your mud. So the mixes we've been doing definitely come around thanks to the experimentations of Lorena and Renata when they were building their house. We started out on the lower levels doing a sort of a rammed earth, like a modified rammed earth technique. So essentially we have the corner posts and the supporting posts in between, like every meter we've got a vertical post for the structure. And in between that, basically we would make like a form, a box, going between the two posts horizontally to make sort of a temporary mold. Rammed earth is typically with a lot more earth, a lot more mud. I think we're using quite a bit more straw than is traditional and making the mud sort of more like a wet clay slip. So mixing it with quite a bit of water and then dunking the straw in, getting it nice and wet with this mud, and then pushing it inside of this mold and stepping it down on it, tamping down on it so that it gets nice and firm. It ends up being like a rock when it dries. I mean, it's insane how firm it is. But you reach a certain level where it becomes inconvenient or impractical to tamp down on something or step down on something from a certain height, or as you're coming up to a frame for a window, you can't really stand on top of the material and under the frame of the window. There's just not enough space. So it does reach certain areas where you've got to come back in as the material dries and shrinks up a bit, that you need to refill with something else or a different mix or just slightly varied to be able to fill in, because you are going to deal with shrinkage quite a bit as the mixture loses moisture. And above that, when we started hitting window frames and things like that at this height where it became impractical to do rammed earth, we started doing a sort of, it's kind of like a modified wattle and daub, but maybe there's a better name for it.
Yeah. Well, it's called paja alivianada in Spanish.
That's great. That's good. It's basically making a similar form, but without using. I'm sorry, let me finish about the boards. So we would fill it, tamp it down, make it nice and firm, and then, of course, take the boards away, take the mold away, and you'd be left with the wall. You need to let it dry pretty well before you put on plaster. We got really excited with one section of wall and put plaster on it pretty quickly, and it never really dried great. And so we actually made the decision to take that section of wall down the other day because it was still really moist inside. We looked into it a little bit, and it was impressive how much moisture was still in there.
It was still really fun to kick a wall down too. So.
It's therapeutic.
Yeah, it was
therapeutic.
worth it.
Actually, that's one of the things people have said when we're doing the community work days is they've called it barro terapia, like mud therapy. And we almost always make the joke that there's people who pay good money to go to like have the mud treatment at the spa and things like that. And it's like, no, like, come work here and you can have the spa treatment for free.
Yeah.
So up above, where again we couldn't do so much tamping and like ramming and pressing down, compressing, we started making long sticks that were putting sort of diagonal on both sides of the posts to sort of contain the material, but without being like a...
It's like a cage that you make.
There you go.
You make a cage. And like some people do it with bamboo. It's very common up in the north, in Brazil, where they use bamboos. Even before, hundreds of years ago, because like if you just put the cob balls on top of each other, you don't have any kind of structure to hold that down. And so some people, to make it easier, you make that structure like a cage-like structure with thin strips of wood or bamboo, and then you fill that cage in with the mud mixture that you have, usually with a lot of more straw too than mud, right?
Yeah. So this is getting the straw damp with this muddy mixture, and what happens is when it dries, there's lots of silicates inside of the straw and inside of the mud, and basically they harden up and form together. It's not like quite a strong chemical bond as you would find with the cement, but it doesn't matter. You've got so much strength and so much material in there, like intertwined and interwoven, that it's just this good luck breaking it. It takes a lot of force.
You don't necessarily need to use that technique. For example, in the house that we live right now, the whole house was made with the rammed earth style. Yeah, it was difficult when you got to the top. You have to use a lot of arm force, but when you're lower down, you can use your legs, which is easier. You know, your whole body weight. It is possible, and it makes the walls really strong. But there are positives and negatives to both of them. The cage structure, you spend more money usually because you have to buy wood. If you're using bamboo, then that's great. But there's a lot more work involved to prepare to work. Whereas the rammed earth, you just need the tablas,
the boards.
The boards, yes. You just need the boards on the sides to kind of make that earth sandwich. And you don't really need any other material besides the earth and the straw. So,
and it's reusable. You can take the form off when you're done with the part, raise it up, fill that, take it off, raise it up, and keep filling that way.
Exactly. So there's a benefit, financial difference between the both. And in my opinion, the cage structure is definitely easier, especially if you're doing a group work. It's easier. You don't really have to worry about if you're doing it right, if you're pressing it too much, if you're pressing it too little. You're just filling that box in. You know, it's easier when you have other people that aren't very experienced. But there is a lot of preparation to do that one. I like those both. I think between all the bioconstruction I've made, the boxed in one is definitely the easiest if you were to do a group work, in my opinion, compared to the superadobe and hyperadobe, where there's a lot more parts to it. You know, the person's holding the bag, the other's filling the bag, and then you're pressing the bag. This one, you just fill the holes in. So there are positives and negatives to all of them. You really have to choose your player.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about a couple positives and negatives with lime and cement too, and then we can get a little bit into super adobe and hyper adobe. We talked a little bit about the environmental benefits of using lime over cement, and lime's a bit more delicate, but also lime and earth buildings are a lot more breathable, a lot more. They don't drink as much moisture from the air or from the ground. It's a big problem with cement. If there's something with cement in the ground, the cement is always going to be sort of wicking moisture from the ground. And if you've got like a wooden post in that cement, well, you're going to be wicking moisture like kind of constantly, and it can start to deteriorate the construction materials over time. So you have to think about moisture barriers, vapor barriers, and things like that. With natural mud buildings, mud plasters, lime buildings, you have transpiration, respiration. Your building is more breathable. You don't get moisture trapped inside the walls. Even if you've got some cracks in your plaster and some rain ends up getting inside, it's going to be able to evaporate out a lot better than it would be able to with a cement plaster. And a mud plaster, even more so than a lime plaster. With just mud plaster, though, sometimes you're sacrificing protection from rain. So it depends on your climate, depends what you're trying to build. Lorena had mentioned, too, that it doesn't just have to be for big projects. It's honestly for practicing, and if you're in a super tightly controlled police state too, where everything is got to be with codes and blah 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 blah. You got to ask permission to collect rainwater and things like that. Maybe it is better to just do something on a smaller scale, a little greenhouse or a tool shed or a little alcove in the garden, a place to sit. There's other things to experiment and play with using natural materials. It doesn't have to be a big giant undertaking necessarily. Just the ability to play and experiment and touch the mud, touch the earth. It's good for you, they say. But those are a few more of the thoughts I had about cement that I think are worth bringing up. Lime plasters can also be oftentimes reutilized. Cement, not so much. Definitely not in like another wall or something like that. We have used quite a bit of whatever we can find to backfill, to level out where we're going to have the floor. Some neighbors, when they knocked down old walls, gave us a call, and we went and picked up all the crushed brick and stuff like that, crushed cement blocks, anything, and rocks, all that kind of stuff. Scooped it up, put it in the truck, brought it over, and put it in as a subflooring basically before we do a final floor. But those kinds of things can often be found, things to think about. Lime can be a little bit more recycled as far as future projects, future plasters, but cement, no, not so much. But still, you can reuse a lot of these things as a subflooring or in other areas where you want drainage, things like that, where you need to backfill. You can always think about those kinds of things. I used to work at Stone Brewing Company in San Diego, and one of the co-founders there, Greg, ended up rescuing, I forget how many thousands of bricks. They were like taking down an old brick building, and there's a code there that you can't reuse bricks structurally. But he was just looking to make like a walkway entry floor. I mean, this great walkway. And after telling them for sure he was not going to be using it for any structural use, and I'm sure he offered a little bit of beer to the crew as like something to sweeten the deal, but he was able to haul away a whole bunch of bricks that I don't know what their finality would have been. They may have just ended up at some junkyard somewhere, or who knows, dumped on the side of the road, but they were put into different use. And Greg was able to make something really beautiful with free materials that were being recycled, upcycled, however you want to look at it. So, things to think about in construction. But coming back to our kind of construction here, the super adobe. So, when talking about all these kinds of things, it's occurring to me that some pictures might be helpful. We'll be putting some pictures up with this post for sure once it goes live to help a little bit. You can definitely look on our social media pages too, at lasbandurrias.uy. Little plug there, but we'll put some pictures up with the post. It encouraged me with the last few episodes too that a few pictures wouldn't be so bad to have up alongside. We're in no rush to get into video podcasting, so we'll do what we can to be able to support the visuals here. So Super Adobe, as I mentioned, was a sort of invention in California. I don't remember exactly if the Iranian architect Nader Khalili, if he was entering in some sort of, I don't want to say competition, open call, trying to design refuge structures on the moon or in the desert. But basically, this was an idea that this gentleman had to use sandbags. Originally, it was developed with sandbags, filling them with whatever materials can be found around. There's different recipes here. Again, the soil is pretty clay rich, and I ended up mixing clay soil about 50-50 with a fine gravel, and only to be able to use the cement mixer instead of mixing everything by shovel. I could have done it all with the soil from here. They recommend, for the amount of rainfall that we get here, et cetera, adding about 5% lime or cement to the mix also. So technically, I like 95% earth and 5%. I regret to say cement. I used cement. I didn't know so much then. I used lime in my plasters, but cement in the structure anyway. But other than that, I used 50-50 with this gravel to be able to use the cement mixer, because otherwise it's all with shovels, and then it's a heck of a lot more work. But I had about 5 or 6 friends helping me 5 or 6 hours a day, and we were done with the structure in 30 days. Basically, you're filling these individual sandbags, or you can get a roll of the same material, like a woven plastic material from the manufacturer, which is what I did. I got the rolls, and you just go around filling in a circle. I mean, you mark it out first. You make a little foundation underneath, 2 levels underneath, putting a metal stake in the middle of your circle, and then with a piece of chain, you take the chain and use it like a compass and mark out your circle and take another circle 40 centimeters out to get the width of the wall. And then you start filling the bags with the mix, depending on where you are and what materials you're using. Mixing it with water, getting it slightly moist. You don't want to be able to squeeze the material and have water come dripping out of your hands, but you want it to hold together. So you go around filling the bag in a circle to fill each layer. So you're sort of making like a big long sausage of mud, and I was using gravel again and a little bit of cement, but you can use lime, or depending, you might not need it if you don't need to stabilize it. If it's not a high rain area, not necessary. And after the level is complete, you come around with a big tamper and you tamp it down to make like more level on the surface. There's a piece of barbed wire or two in between each level that helps with the tensile strength. After the first few levels, when you want to start coming in, as it starts coming in on itself, as it's forming a dome, a half sphere, you basically take little pieces of the chain off. Like every level, you take 4 centimeters of chain off. You're still running with the same stick in the middle, your same center point. So you're basically making the circle smaller with each round, like just a little bit, steps in, steps in, steps in. And it's really forgiving. If on certain levels you put too much or put too little, you can fix it with a tamper in a lot of cases. Or at the next level, you can just simply put more material in. And when you want to include your windows or whatever, it's super simple to put in a frame or a mold and then just build the material around it. So a dome or an arch has the benefit of being extremely structurally sound. It's one of the few shapes that actually gets stronger over time. You don't have walls trying to pull apart from each other at 90 degrees. The force is very strongly distributed down and evenly. And so the weight just kind of compacts on itself and makes a very, very strong wall. And once it was covered with the lime plasters, it becomes sort of like a big giant rock limestone monolith. It looks like something from Tatooine from Star Wars. People have told me. I'm not a big Star Wars guy, but I think I remember what they were talking about. It does kind of look like that. I've heard it looks a little bit like an egg house, like there's 3 eggs sticking out of the ground.
Or the cone head.
Yeah. But it's a super strong structure, like I said, and very forgiving. But a brilliant design, not mine, but the architect's. He also had a really cool book called Ceramic Houses, which is a fascinating idea to me. Basically, making an earthen house, but also filling it with lots of material, lots of flammable material afterwards, lots of wood, and also ceramics to fire, like it's in a kiln. But yeah, you end up basically with a ceramic house. I've never seen one in person, and I'd be really stoked to see it, but it's a cool book. The hyperadobe, which you were talking about, Lorena, that you had experience with, I've never tried. But it's essentially the difference. My understanding is that they use like a more open mesh bag, like the kind of bag you would get like a 25-kilo bag of onions or potatoes. It's more of an open mesh.
And it's not a bag, it's one long bag.
If you have a great source of these onion bags or potato bags, you can use the bags because you can get them for free. But otherwise, it's definitely easier to buy the roll from the manufacturer. So hyperadobe, you don't have to come through afterwards with the barbed wire. Because the mesh is much more open, you actually have the material coming in contact with the material. These other bags that we were talking about for the superadobe, for sandbags, it's much more of a closed mesh, so you're not getting anywhere near as much of a chemical bond between the layers. I mean, the plaster takes care of that, but it's definitely a stronger chemical bond, especially if you're using a little bit of lime or cement in the mix. You're going to get a stronger bond using it with hyperadobe than superadobe, as far as my understanding goes. And I think it uses a little bit less water. I think with the hyperadobe, you want to make it a little less moist than with the superadobe.
Yeah, over there in the mix, there was no lime or cement. It was just the soil, the clay that we got from a hole that we dug. In Minas Gerais, we do have it's like one of those red soils, you know. It
Yeah,
has that red clay, and all we used was the soil that we dug up. We would filter it. But what's the word? Tamizar.
like civet,
Sieve it,
or
yeah.
yeah, I
So we
guess.
don't take out the rocks, big rocks and sticks and things like that we would find. So we will get that finer material. And then we have to moisten it, throw some water on it, we'll hose it down, mix it up a little bit. So yeah, we definitely don't want it to drip. It's definitely not a mud, like a wet mud like we would use here in the salon inside the mud sandwiches wall. It's definitely like something that you want to press it together and you want it to stay put, you know, like pressing it down and it stays. But it's definitely not soaked or dripping. We could do like a cylinder or a circular shape. Now that's the freedom with having the bags, because you can literally draw what you want, whatever shape you want, and you can just build on top of that. We over there we made kind of like a half circle villa with 7 rooms, and they're all connected. So
Wow.
it's just like a half circle with 7 rooms, and there was no wood structure made, just like your domes. You know, there's no like
Yeah, there's no beams, no
no
columns.
beams,
I
not
mean,
on on the wall.
above the doors, yeah, but
Yeah, above the doors, yeah, or the windows. Of course, there's that whole. Of course, you need that, but ultimately the whole structure just like started just like with Randy's domes. You know, you make the foundation a couple of levels down with the same material. There, we made it with the same material, and then you go up as high as you want. You make your windows, your doors, and when we got to the level where, all right, we want to make the roof here, we put the beams, the wood roof. I guess you make the whole roof frame and you make the roof. So there, that's what we did. The whole roof was connected to the structure of the bags through a metal beam that was stuck inside and hit all the way into the bottom. So yeah, it was already kind of like what I said. It turned into a big rock, like a big structure, like heavy rock structure. It looks like it's just one solid wall, because after you put the plaster and the mud around it, it's all one big unit. You know, it's not separate like with the material in the superadobe, where they don't really connect with each other. This one turns the whole wall into one big thing. It was crazy when I first did that. It was awesome, that build. I spent months building that villa for the rich people to rent.
well, the other difference too with the bags, with the superadobe bags, this tighter weave that's not as open. Ideally, you want to cut off the bags afterwards or burn the bags is what's commonly done to be able to have the plaster adhere better, like chemically adhere. I don't know. I wanted to try without doing that step because I jumped into a lot of this without knowing a whole lot. And because I had helped build the other domes, I don't know, had this sort of healthy or unhealthy confidence that mine were going to turn out fine no matter what. And they largely did, but I did not cut the bags. I did not burn the bags. Cutting just seemed like a lot of work, and burning, I didn't want to burn all that plastic inside my house when it was already done. Like a week later, I saw people on Instagram doing it, and once they got up to a certain height, they started burning the bags down below while it was still open and during construction. So, like, the fumes still not great for the environment, but at least it's not filling up the house. But anyway, I didn't do that. So my plaster adhered pretty well. On the outside, honestly, a lot of the bags started to degrade from being in the sun. In fact, in one moment, a piece of the bag broke off and like a little bit of the material with it, and it sent me down, I don't know, maybe 3 meters, but sort of like a pinball, thankfully, in between two of the domes. I bounced back and forth as I was sliding down after it gave out on me, but I kind of joked laughingly when I got down because it just scared me. And I just, as a reflex, yelled out, like, no! And I was like, oh man, I'm glad those were my last words. It wasn't a bad fall, but it was a scare anyway. But on the inside, the plastic isn't being eaten away by the sun, but it definitely has had lasting effects. It's a lot better to remove the bags. So with hyperadobe, you don't have to do that. Again, for the same reason that between layers, it bonds better. The same is true on the outside and on the inside, binding with the plaster. You have a much better, what you'd call a key for the plaster, something for the plaster to lock into. You actually don't want a very, very smooth surface when you're doing the first coat or two of plaster. You want some sort of structure that it can latch onto. Think of like Velcro. You want it to have like nooks and crannies and little cracks to be able to latch onto physically while it chemically bonds and cures over the course of a few days or weeks. So we talked about using animal poop in our plasters, in our building materials a little bit. There are reasons why. It's not just because it's free and because we're gross. No, there's actually strong reasons. We need fibers. Fibers to hold together all this material. It's part of the glue that holds together the mud. So we talked a lot about the straw as sort of like a big coarse fiber that helps us structurally. More so on the plaster side, we want finer fibers, smaller fibers, lots more of them. And it just so happens that can be found very easily in horse poop, cow poop. Horse poop is used quite a bit with flooring, but cow poop is something that I've seen in lots and lots and lots of research. There's a whole world of research in India about cow poop and its many uses as a fuel. And for this, for helping with plasters and helping with floors, we're adding it to the plasters. Like, how much would you say, Lorena?
Oh my God, that's a difficult question because there's a lots of recipes of the perfect bioconstruction mix.
Yeah.
This many parts sand, this many part this. I think we were just going with whatever we had. But I would say if you're gonna put 3 parts clay or mud, I would put 1 part poop.
Okay.
But we weren't measuring, it was very organic.
We go by smell. No.
Yeah, no, we go by texture and
taste.
Yeah, some of us. There are many tests to check to see if your mix is right. In our case, where we were using more of a liquid substance to dip the straw in, we call it the glove test. We stick our hands in, and if our hands come out completely covered with a thick layer of mud without, exposing your skin, then it was ready.
And this is for the mud with the straw. We're not talking about sticking our hands in a huge thing of poop to see if it sticks to our hands and stuff.
I mean, cow poop now, once you get used to cow poop, it doesn't even seem like real poop.
Yeah. No, we definitely touch it. I mean, it's not to say that we don't, but it just...
It's mostly grass.
It is. And so, and it's important to note right now that the smell absolutely disappears when it's dry. And so this is something that helps very much with the longevity of your wall. And it's something you can probably find for free around you if you're in the countryside with anyone who's got cows. I work with a neighbor, and we have a couple of cows, and so every once in a while we went over to collect buckets full of poop. And we do that too sometimes for the garden. For the garden, we're looking for dry poop, dry manure. For this, we're looking for the freshest.
Yeah, if you're going to make the filling, let's say the wall, there's a different mix. You don't necessarily need so much sand as you would the plaster. So you won't have as many cracks. And then there's not just any plaster. There's that first one where you kind of make a rough mix with also not as much sand, just to kind of even out and protect that first layer of the wall. And then there's a second one where you can do like a more fine plaster with sand. Some people use some other materials like how do you call it? Marble, I guess. Different finer materials, finer minerals that you can put inside.
Maybe quartz?
Yeah, maybe that. There are some companies that cut these rocks, and you can get the powder that comes out of that. That's quartz.
There's quartz powder and marble powder.
Yeah, marble. So
I've
there's
seen both
so
here.
many mixes you can use depending on what you want to do. There are infinite options, but ultimately there's the mud, the sand, and that glue that sticks it together, which is for us the poop, the fibers of the fresh poop.
Yeah. So not just the fibers. Actually, the poop contains mucopolysaccharides, which are like these sticky proteins from the cow's rumen, and it helps act as a natural binder, but also helps with waterproofing the poop. I don't know if it's specifically these proteins, but something else in the poop makes the plaster more flexible, makes it more breathable, vapor permeable. So it has benefits beyond just the fine fibers, which help prevent cracks and help extend the life of your wall or floor or whatever you're doing.
And it's clear, like if I dig a hole and I collect the soil from here, the percentage of sand and clay is different from a neighbor 10 kilometers from here. And so there are many tests that people use. The easiest one is just taking a little bit of your soil and leaving it in a glass jar of water and waiting it out a couple of days to see how it all separates. Give it a good mix, and then you wait it out to see when the sand and the clay separates, and you see how much each you have in your soil. So it all depends on that and what you're doing. But ultimately, it's that, right? These three ingredients are like the main: clay, the sand, and the poop. For us, at least, it's what we've been using.
Yeah, yeah. So there's the thick plaster, which is what we're doing just with the earth and the sand and the poop. And then the final plaster, the fine plaster, will be the lime plaster. That's going to be a little bit more protective, a little bit more like a rock. That's something that we're going to be doing a little bit further on. It's not something you can do in the extreme heat of summer or in the extreme cold of winter. So, I mean, with no rush, if we get all the other mud plasters and stuff done before end of summer,
Yeah.
autumn would be great to be able to do lime plaster. Otherwise, we'll wait it out till spring.
And after that, there's also liquid plaster you can put on for more protection, and then you can add color. I mean, you can call it paint, but it's kind of like a liquid plaster if you think about it. It's giving you protection. It's sealing off a lot of those pores.
Yeah, I mean, even using lime as a paint, whitewashing, it's where the phrase comes from, whitewashing using lime and water, very, very diluted. You just paint on several thin layers, and as it dries, as it reacts, as it recarbonates and takes that CO2 in from the air, it becomes this really, really bright white. It's really crazy. Like, that's one big surprise for me is we mixed the lime with a very dark, we have a black clay here, like a black clay soil. It's very dark. We mixed the mud plaster as a test with some of the lime to try out some of the lime plaster and some of the fine plaster. And when you put it on the wall, it's pretty dark. But as it cures and dries, it becomes like a really, really, really light
Gray,
beige, grayish, kind of like a little bit of a rose color. A little bit. Beige is a good word, I think. Swiss coffee.
This moment in the plaster for me is also a really fun moment because you can also be a little bit creative. You can make shapes and form shelves, things like that that you can stick into the wall. That's a moment where you can go crazy and do all these types of things. We also didn't talk about bottles. There's so many things that we can put inside. Not only for light, not only to just fill the wall, but you can make all types of shapes. Here we used big wine bottles, like 10-liter bottles. They come in all different shapes, wine bottles and any type of liquor bottles that you have.
A couple old windows from a truck.
Yeah, recycled windows, glasses, even just a regular glass, any shape, you can stick it into the wall in the mud, cover it all around, and you can really play around and have fun with it. I mean, I'm not saying that all bioconstruction houses are like that. You can literally do a house that looks exactly like your neighbor's house and be made out of mud. You can make a square house, a round house. There's no limits to it. But the plaster moment is really the fun moment. With the lime color, like Reddy said, you can add different kinds of pigments, natural pigments from plants, from foods, from fruits. There's so many crazy things you could find that makes different colors. I remember you made some colors out of milk and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, not all of them, sometimes you have to think about the funguses and things that grow, but ultimately you can play around and have fun with this moment.
Oh, yeah. You can make some really cool natural paints. I had made some, but things I've learned since, the recipe wasn't great. I used a flaxseed oil, like a linseed oil in the paint, and I think that's where my main problem was, that it got moldy because I used a natural linseed oil. It wasn't anything that had any chemical desiccants. It needs to be cooked linseed oil, and I don't know how much it was cooked. I should have maybe cooked it more, but I think that's what happened. I think mold is what ended up eating it on the outside, but there was a really cool design on my house at one point on the outside, but now it still looks nice, but it's white.
Yeah, the white is good too. I mean, if you talk about heat and extreme sun, the white reflects and makes it more thermically efficient. But yeah, color is good too.
Yeah. No, but you're totally right about the ability to sculpt with earth plasters and the ability to just kind of stick things in the wall, and when the wall dries, like it's going to be there. I mean, you can make really really great shapes, little carve out spaces, like relief spaces too. Like you mentioned about the bottles, if you've got bottles of different colors, you can make a really neat effect when the sun beats through. It can be really really beautiful. Obviously, if you have some sort of gift with stained glass or something, have a blast.
I do have one important thing to say if you are going to start building your house. When you talk about furnitures and shelving and things like that, things you want to hang on the wall, things you want to nail onto the wall, you have to plan that before you make your walls. Because, at least in our case, if you want to nail anything, no, you can't just hammer a nail onto the wall. Because of the material, eventually it would start to get loose. It's not like something that is as solid that the nail will stay there if you want to hang something heavy, a heavy shelf, for example, or cabinets of your kitchen. And so that's something that what we did in the tiny house that we live now is put the beams where we wanted to have something hanging, be it cabinets or a dresser. So that's really important because once the wall is done, you can't really open it up and then, I mean, I guess you can, but it's definitely going to take more work.
It's work, yeah. It's
So,
definitely work.
yeah, so I mean, that's something that it's really important to plan it out. For me, that I'm a person that loves to change my furniture around every couple months. I get bored. It's hard, because you kind of have to keep that thing there for, I guess, forever or for a long time. So it's important to plan out your house, plan out your shelves, even if you're not going to use it today. Some people I've seen put extra beams in certain places just in case one day they want to turn this space into an office or something like that. So that's also really important to think about because it's definitely not just a regular cement wall or a wood frame wall. It's something that's a different material when it comes to making holes and things like that.
It's a good point. It's a good point. One other thing I thought of with superadobe at the very least, I don't know about hyperadobe, but at the very least, superadobe has been studied in like the U.S. building code. Again, getting back to if you need to ask permission to do things, it has been studied and approved for use in, I think, in the United States in general, definitely in California. If you're around Hesperia, around Los Angeles, the Cal Earth Institute is there. I've never went in person, but it's a really, really cool space that showcases a lot of great possibilities with this style of architecture. But anyway, it's approved for code. In fact, Los Angeles, known for its seismic activity, they put it to an earthquake test, and my understanding is that it actually broke the machine that does the testing. Like, that's how strong the walls were. It just totally resisted, like, outperformed their wildest dreams. Well, let's talk just real quickly. I'm going to mention a couple things that I found in putting together the episode. I'd heard some things about self-healing concrete, self-replicating concrete that seemed really interesting to me. These are cement-based, but they're being studied at the very least. Interesting. The self-healing concrete, they're actually embedding the cement mix with a certain sort of bacillus bacteria and calcium lactate that I guess is both of them are stable for like 200 years. And if there's any crack, when water enters inside there, it activates these bacteria, like brings them out of dormancy. They eat this calcium lactate and they excrete calcium carbonate, which is limestone. And I guess it can heal cracks like up to 2 millimeters wide or something. It's kind of interesting just seeing how microorganisms are being used. And then the self-replicating concrete was something that sounded very weird to me. It's like a mixture of sand and a hydrogel, which don't ask me to explain because I don't know what it is, but some sort of gel that they use as a growth medium for a different kind of bacteria, Synechococcus, something like that. And anyway, it starts to grow on this hydrogel, and as they start to reproduce, they do the same thing. They biomineralize. One of their excretions is calcium carbonate. And so it ends up making itself as the bacteria is reproducing. They start to eat the substrate and they make calcium carbonate. So you're literally making this concrete in place and like having microorganisms work for you. They haven't gotten it up all the way to the same strength as regular concrete, but it's of course being studied. And then lastly, getting back to more natural, I've seen some cool stuff being done with mycelium, with the roots of mushrooms, not the like fruiting bodies, the reproductive organs that we see above ground, but the mycelium, the sort of roots, if you will, of the mushrooms. And they've been feeding them like agricultural waste. A lot of times they can use rice hulls or wheat husks or things like that, but they're using the mycelium, sometimes coating them with minerals or using them in conjunction with these same bacteria, and can grow it in any kind of shape you want, making a mold and letting it sort of fill out that mold. And so you can make these prefabricated bricks or panels with mycelium that super low carbon footprint. It's grown from waste. It's pretty fire resistant, biodegradable. They're looking at how to design it with self-repair functions too. Interesting stuff. So if any of that interests you, check it out online. We'll provide a few links in the post as well. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Lorena?
Nope. All good.
Wonderful, because we've been going for a little while now, and it's getting dark here. I don't know if you guys can hear the frogs. They stopped now, but there were some frogs a little bit ago.
And the mosquitoes.
There's a couple mosquitoes right now too, so yeah, let's wrap it up then. Well, thank you so much for tuning into the 4th episode of the Planting Change podcast. This journey from raw earth to a living home shows us that everything has potential. In our next conversation, we apply that same thinking to what we often discard. Episode 5 is all about compost, the foundation of life in the food forest. We'll explore how to transform household waste from the kitchen to the toilet into vital resources for the land. It's a crucial piece of the regenerative puzzle. We hope you'll join us to dig in. Now be sure to subscribe to the Planting Change podcast on your favorite podcast app and follow our journey on social media at lasbandurrias.uy. And remember, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Take care, and we'll see you in 2 weeks on the Planting Change podcast.
See ya.